Welcome to WonderCon 2021. My name's Andrew Sumner. I'm from Titan Comics, and I also host the Forbidden Planet TV broadcast channel on YouTube. And I am here with my guests, the wonderful author, Cynthia Von Buehler, and the wonderful editor, Charles Ardai. Now, let me tell you a bit about these people. Excuse me. Cynthia is an award-winning American artist, author, and animal activist. And in her career, she's written and illustrated books for children and adults, created, produced, and directed multi-year theatrical productions, while exhibiting her art in galleries around the world, including street art installations. Cynthia is particularly well known for the wonderful Illuminati Ball, the brilliant Minky Woodcock series that we publish at Titan, and for illustrating Evelyn, A Terrible Tale in 2 times. Welcome, Cynthia. How are you?
I'm good. How are you? Thank you.
I'm great. I'm great. Thanks for being here at WonderCon. And I would also like to introduce the editor, the man, the myth, the legend, the man behind the hard case crime imprint, Mr. Charles Ardai. Now, Charles, in addition to owning and running Hard Case Crime, which is one of the imprints tied in with Titan Books, our colleagues at Titan Books, Charles has received the Seamus Award for his nomination for his short story Nobody Wins, and he received the Edgar Award, get that, in 2007 for his short story The Homefront, and in 2005 he received the Ellery Queen Award for his brilliant work on the Hard Case Crime imprint. And if you're not a fan of Hard Case Crime, you will be at the end of this panel. And we are here very specifically to talk about Minky Woodcock, the girl who electrified Tesla. But before we start talking about that, Charles, how are you? How are you, Charles?
Good.
Yeah,
I'm doing well. It's great to be here on the screen with you. We don't do too much in-person meeting anymore in this world of ours, but it's a little bit of human contact.
Yeah, no, a glorious human contact, and also it's great to be here on this virtual stage at WonderCon 2021. So,
absolutely,
Cynthia and Charles, what can you tell me about Minky Woodcock and her latest adventure?
Well, I think that editors are really the best at summing up books, so I'm going to let Charles answer that.
Sure. Minky Woodcock is a detective, a private eye, who works for her father, even though he is somewhat reluctant to let her get into the family business. She's determined to do it. She's independent, tough, smart, intrepid, and she's had 2 cases for us. This is the second. The first was in 1927, having to do with the famous escape artist Harry Houdini and his mysterious death on Halloween. It's now nearly 20 years later. It's the height of World War II, and the famous although he could have used a little bit more cash in the bank. The famous inventor Nikola Tesla, who is best known today as the namesake of the electric car line, but back in the day was really one of the most rebellious and imaginative inventors in the world. He had a long-running feud with Thomas Edison over how electric current ought to be run. And toward the end of his life, he claimed to be working on a death ray. And this death ray comes to the attention of various people in our government, enemy governments, other folks, and they all want a piece of it. And Minky gets hired by several of them to look into this mysterious new invention, and many menacing and interesting things happen.
Wonderful. That is a fantastic and very gripping synopsis. I guess my question is, having heard it, is would you need to have read the first edition out as a graphic novel from Titan Comics, The Girl Who Handcuffed Houdini, to understand and enjoy this adventure?
No, I wrote this as a completely separate story, but it would help if you read it. That's great. We talk a little bit about it. It comes back in little pieces, but for the most part, it's a completely separate story.
Yeah, I think that's.
So read the first one, but you don't have to.
Yeah. I think that's a great way of answering it. No, you don't need to have, but why wouldn't you read the first one? Because the first one's fantastic. So read it, and they'll both be available. How would you both describe the arc as a traditional detective story, or do you think it has aspects of noir, hard-boiled crime? What kind of bracket would you place it in, if indeed that bracket exists?
I would say that it's a little different because I'm laying out all the facts, and it's not the kind of traditional crime story where there's going to be, in the end, there's a definite answer. It's more of a story about that's based on true historical facts that will reveal all this information. Some people think that maybe Tesla was murdered. I don't want to, say he was. I'm just giving you all the facts and, put that out there. And so I'd say it's sort of along the same lines, but not quite. But Charles, what do you think?
One of the amazing things Cynthia does is unearth real information about historical figures that you couldn't possibly imagine is true, and it is. So some of the things that Tesla was fascinated with, his fascination with numerology, for instance, and some of the peculiar things that he investigated, some of the strange things about the animal companions he had in his life, including a pigeon that he described his relationship with as being akin to the relationship of a man to a woman. Now, that's very interesting. How many people would say that? All of these things are true. And that's the wonderful thing. When you read one of Cynthia's detective investigations, it's kind of an interrogation of the whole world in which the story takes place. And you come away with a real distinct appreciation for what a peculiar place we live in. One day, perhaps Minkee at a grandmother's age could tackle a case closer in time to our own world. But there's something wonderful about the era of the 20s, 30s, and 40s. And Andrew, your question, noir and hard-boiled, and this is not an Agatha Christie type whodunit where you've got fair play clues, and as you say at the end, the police come in and arrest the criminal. I think it has a lot to do with the world of noir, and the fact that it's a graphic novel and not a prose novel is part of the reason for that. You have mysterious settings, you have wonderful lighting and angles, and it feels a little bit like watching a great classic 1940s movie.
I also found, having been privileged enough to see a lot of the pages, I think it taps into Eisner's handling of noir to me when I look at it. If you're familiar with Will Eisner's work at all, who's the great, who's the great comic book expert in delivering movie style noir pacing on the page and atmosphere. And I think what you produced is just suffused with this glorious atmosphere that you really take away as a reader.
I am trying to look back at some of the old comics, the pulp comics, and try to have that same sort of energy.
Yeah, no, I think you've been very successful. You really come away with that, I think. Now, speaking of coming away with that, what is it you both would like readers to take away from this story?
I'd say that this story is really about, it's a few different things, but weapons of mass destruction and how evil they are, and how if women were in charge, they wouldn't be out there. But I think that it's kind of about weapons of mass destruction and how the government is always looking for something like that. It's also about profit over everything else. And I feel that if Tesla had funding, we would even have free power now. Free energy. He was looking into that. The only reason he decided to do a weapon of mass destruction, the death ray, which he called the peace ray, was because he wanted to get funding to build his tower, so he could get free power. I mean, we could use that in Texas right now, where where all the power is out. I mean, free power would be great. So if someone had given him money and supported him, instead he died penniless.
Yeah, no, so true. To focus in on your protagonist, what is it you think makes Minkee a great detective or a great lead figure?
What do you think, Charles?
Well, I will say she looks good in a trench coat, but that's a terrible answer. It is useful though for a graphic novel.
Okay.
Minkee is determined to carve out her place in the world against all odds and against any adversity. Her brother is given pride of place in the detective agency, even though he doesn't want it. He wants to be a Broadway hoofer. And she goes to her dad and she says, I want this role. And we don't really understand when we read the first book what all the family history is behind his reluctance to let her do that. Is it just run-of-the-mill sexism, or is there more to it than that? And in this new volume, we learn a great deal more, and we get closure on some of these issues of her family history that remain mysteries even at the end of the Houdini volume. And I think readers are going to really enjoy that.
She's very curious too. I think that one of the things that makes a great private detective is curiosity. So I think that she's not just interested in getting her paycheck. She wants to like really find out, and she digs really deep, and she often digs so deep into these crimes that she gets herself tied up in them.
So Lauren Noding, who is our PR manager at Titan Comics, both of whom you will know because she set up this panel for us. She's a big fan of Minkee, and she had specific questions about Minkee's father and to what degree he might be supportive of her endeavors in this second adventure. Well,
he isn't really very supportive of her being a private investigator. It appears that he's sexist, but yeah. in this episode we find out a little bit more behind why he doesn't want her to be a private detective. So he is sexist, but there's more to it. There's something a little deeper than that.
Now I'm going to introduce just a little droplet of spoiler here, not for this adventure, but for the first comic where Arthur Conan Doyle pops up and mentions that his character Sherlock Holmes was based on Minkee's father. So Lauren's next question, which she asked me, was, do we have any more appearances from other famous authors to look forward to in this arc?
We don't have any famous authors, but we do have some famous people. We have Josephine Baker makes an appearance.
Yeah,
she's actually partners with Minkee in this episode. Many people don't realize that Josephine Baker herself was during World War II, she was a spy. So I'm pulling information from that. So this, she was dealing with Nazis and going and drinking with them and getting information from them and passing it on to the French government. So we have Josephine Baker, and surprisingly enough, we have Donald Trump's uncle was involved in Tesla's case, which is another really bizarre fact, but it's true that Donald Trump's uncle was a scientist, believe it or not. And he was asked to look into whether or not the death ray was real, whether it was something that could actually be made. So he's in it. And then we have JP Morgan, who was an investor in Tesla, but then was just kind of trying to control him.
And you have the best model in the world for JP Morgan.
Yes, you.
Charles, of course.
I was the model for JP Morgan. I'm very, very proud of it.
You were really good. I actually was holding it.
I got to hold a cigar, and
he didn't know how to hold a cigar. He was holding it like a cigarette.
Right, I don't know.
Well, of course, Charles, to the uninitiated, is famous for straddling the worlds of editorial creativity and high finance, right? Which makes you relatively unusual. It might make you unique, because I'm trying to think of anybody else I know who I've met in 35 years of writing and editing that's got your background, and I don't think I ever have.
Right.
It's a little bit odd. I do remember back in the day when Amazon was getting started, and everyone thought that it was a wild lark on the part of Jeff Bezos, who worked at the same company I did, and I thought of him as a book lover first and a business person second when he started Amazon. And I remember having conversations with him where I would say, this is a great thing from the point of view of loving books, but selling books on the internet is not likely to be a big business, Jeff. So don't ever, ever, ever take investment advice from me.
Now, moving into an alternate dimension of questions, would you say, Cynthia, I'd be very interested in knowing who your inspirations were for Minkee, whether that be fictional characters, real life detectives, or famous women of history. Who inspired you to create this character?
I'd say, I'm really interested in that time period, the 20s, 30s, and 40s. And I've actually been doing a little bit of investigation myself. I investigated the death of my grandfather. And he was a bootlegger during Prohibition here in New York City, and he was murdered, and I investigated that. So I sort of became an investigator, And then, there's some interesting people. There's Frances Glessner Lee, who is this little old woman who made forensic dollhouse models. And I find her really fascinating. Like this woman who back then was recreating crime scenes, like bloody crime scenes with dolls. I don't know if you've heard of her, but of course, Miss Marple, and then there's a woman named Maud West, who was a private detective in the 20s. So there were female private detectives out there. I was also looking at a lot of the old pulp crime, the women, like they're sexy, but they're strong and they're powerful. And so I was kind of looking at that for inspiration.
Yeah, okay, that really does make a lot of sense. And what difference do you think it makes having a female protagonist in what was very much traditionally a male role throughout the 20th century? What do you think Minkee's femininity brings to the story and to the case?
Well, I mean, I think she uses her femininity. Like she's not afraid to use her sexuality for power, but I think that people wouldn't expect a woman back then to have been a detective. And I think that she's coming at this and they might not expect her. They just kind of write her off. But she's actually, so I think that having a female detective is just a little bit more interesting. And I think having it come from a female mind, you're getting a different perspective, because a lot of times the crime, these crime stories are written by men. So you're getting this different perspective from a female's point of view.
Yeah. Okay, well said. How about yourself, Charles? What do you think about that question?
Well, people underestimate Minkee at their own peril, but they do it. Also, the detective in a detective story is typically an outsider, even when it's a male detective. Someone like Philip Marlowe or Sam Spade goes around high society clubs and settings and doesn't fit in. He's the working class lout who is forcing himself on on his betters in some sense, and from a social equality point of view. And how much more so is that gulf between the detective and the people he or she is questioning emphasized when it's a woman instead of a man, and especially so when it's a period story set back in the 30s, 40s, 50s. And so you have this interesting tension between the person who is, from a social and economic point of view, relatively powerless, but who is holding to account people who are supposed to be able in society to act with impunity. So she outwits the cops, she outwits the FBI, she makes demands of J.P. Morgan, one of the richest and most powerful men in the world. And she is able to do this because of her tenacity and because of her intelligence and because she finds the answers that no one else can find.
Yeah, well said. I think that's very interesting. Actually, just to ask you another question, Charles, how did you end up working with Cynthia on Minky Woodcock? How did you end up editing this project and bringing it to publication with Cynthia? What was the genesis of the project?
Cynthia and I we've known each other for many years and in many contexts. And I remember there was a lunch that we had years ago before we'd ever done any work together, just for fun. And we talked about the idea of doing a comic book. I think at the time, Cynthia, you hadn't done a comic before. You'd done illustrated volumes, but not specifically a comic. And I remember warning you that the amount of work was enormous, because you have to think this is 88 pages of strip, and each page has perhaps an average of 5 panels on it. So you're talking about 400 or 500 separate pieces of art. And even a prolific illustrator, that's a huge amount of work. I mean, your hands get numb and you're working to deadlines. And I remember saying you should only do this if it would be something you really love, something that you'd have a lot of fun doing. And then Cynthia, you came up with Minkee, and I fell in love with it too. I've been a Houdini fan all my life. For a Jewish kid growing up in New York City and being fascinated with magic, the idea that there was this great, Jewish immigrant kid fascinated with magic who became one of the most famous people in the world by his own wits. Houdini has always been a fascinating character to me. And so when Cynthia said, we're going to investigate Houdini's death, I was sold. I didn't need any persuading.
I think you liked the title too.
Yes. The Girl Who Handcuffed Houdini.
I think I had the title at the time, and you were like, well, that's a great title, The Girl Who Handcuffed Houdini.
It's true. And then Tesla, Tesla came about in a kind of different way. And again, what really hooked me in the end when Cynthia had the title. It was just a perfect title, The Girl Who Electrified Tesla. And, you know, how do you follow Houdini? That's a very hard act to follow. Literally, back in the day, he was the headliner. Nobody followed Houdini. You know, everyone preceded Houdini, and then he was the big closing act. And how do you top that? And you can't top Houdini, but Tesla, in his own way, is just as intriguing and just as out there and fascinating. By the way, Cynthia, I've got a question for you. Do you happen to know whether the correct pronunciation is Tesla like an S or Tesla like a Z?
I think it's with an S.
Okay, I just don't know.
Positive. That's actually a really good question. Actually, everybody pronounces his first name incorrectly, but and
what's the right way?
Yeah, what? Nikola.
What's the right way to say it?
Nikola.
Nikola.
Oh, so
okay.
It's not pronounced Nikolai.
No, it's not Nikolai or Nicola or.
Really? I never
Nikola.
knew that.
I always say it to rhyme with the cough drop, you know, Ricola.
Yeah.
I think, well, I don't know. I mean, we should probably ask somebody who is, you know, from his same country, how to, you know, what the real pronunciation is. I don't know. I think it's Tesla. I don't think it's, you know, with a Z. I think it's with an S. But we should look into that. That would be,
yes.
You should be pronouncing it correctly.
Maybe there's a sequel here, which is The Girl Who Uncovered the Pronunciation of Tesla's name.
There you go. It might be a more limited audience, but I'll read it.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, that there are English and grammar fiends everywhere in the world, you know, so
absolutely.
Never underestimate the audience, right? Now, what is speaking of Tesla himself, Charles, were you excited to hear that Cynthia had plans for a second Minkee arc and had plans to take Minkee in the direction that she has?
Oh, very, very much so. You know, one of the things that I find most interesting about it is the gap in time between the first volume and the second. Typically, in a series, very little time passes between one book and the next. Spider-Man doesn't get any older. In fact, he never gets any older. He's still a teenager after 60 years. But in this case, you get to peek in at Minkee at two very different stages of her life. You know, she was basically a teenager, I think maybe literally a teenager or almost just out of her teens in the first volume. And she was experiencing her very first case. She was a rookie detective. And now here we are 17 years later, and she's more of a seasoned veteran. And that's two different stages in a person's life. I'm different than I was 17 years ago. 17 years ago, I was just starting hard case crime. So I think it's a particularly nice opportunity to give readers a different taste of the same character.
Yeah,
that's
well
true.
said.
Right. It's you know, it's sort of a big jump between it's sort of the beginning and the end, because there's a whole backstory about her parents. And in this episode, you actually find out what that is, right? So the backstory gets kind of answered in this one.
Oh, lovely. Yeah, I've got a question for both of you, which is, for each of you, do you have a favorite aspect of Minkee's world, of Minkee's universe that you like working on, that you appreciate? I know it must be difficult for you, Cynthia, because, you know, when you're the creator, you created it all, right? So, you know.
There's a lot. I mean, I really love, I'm very curious, and I really love finding these bizarre details that you read it and you think, that can't be true. And then you go and find out that it's actually true. You'll Google it. And I think that's really interesting. I love it when I'm reading a book and I read something and I think, is that really true? And then you go and Google it and you find out more about it. And then you go down all of these rabbit holes. And that's one thing I like about, there's a lot of rabbit holes in these books. I also really love animals, and I love bringing animals into it. So I know that I'm always bringing in, this time I've got the pigeons, and I actually raise pigeons. So it's really interesting to be bringing in the pigeons, and I've got the rabbit. And so I really love bringing animals into my stories. I also illustrate write and illustrate children's books. So I like to put a little bit of that in there.
Can I ask a question though? Because I'm glad you brought up the pigeon raising. Because so just to digress for a second. So I'm from the north of England, right? I'm from Liverpool, city in the north of England, famous city in the north of England. Wow. And just a bit further north is a county where a lot of my family live. It's called Lancashire. Mm-hmm. That is a very famous part of the world for pigeon rearing, and they call them pigeon fanciers. People who raise, breed, and raise pigeons.
Right.
Now, it's as an early, it's an almost completely all male pursuit. Yeah. Generally, for like working class blue collar guys over the age of 65 who have such thick and robust Northern accents that I think you would both find them very, very difficult to understand. And there's a particular uniform they have, which essentially they're dressed in these kind of 1930s-esque working men's clothes, and they all wear flat caps, right?
Yep.
Now, it seems to me that you are, based upon my experience, a somewhat atypical pigeon fancier, because you don't look like anybody I've ever met or related to who has that as an interest. I'd love to know where that came from.
Okay, well, it's a little complicated, but my family actually were similar to that. And in the Bronx, where my family is from, they used to have pigeons on their roof. And
on the roofs of the apartment buildings.
Right? Yeah, on the roofs, they'd have the pigeons. They'd wear the same outfit with the hat and that they would do, Yeah. And so my family did that. And so, I have that in the history, and I did research my grandfather. So, and it was a story about the Bronx. So, and I made a play about it and I ran for years and years in New York City. So I had the pigeons in the show for that because of my grandfather's story, and I incorporated the pigeons into that story. But also I rehabilitate animals, and somebody brought me a pigeon. Actually, I started with doves. I was raising doves, 30 years ago. And then somebody brought me a pigeon, and then I got it a friend, and then they had babies, and now I have 75 pigeons. But I don't race them, I rehabilitate them. So I have partners in New York City. When they find an injured pigeon, they'll rehabilitate it, and then they'll bring it to me, and it can live with my pigeons, who fly free during the day, but come back at night. Yeah. So I am a little bit unusual, but I really love pigeons. I can understand why Tesla was in love with a pigeon. I have a pigeon I really like too, very close with. And but when I started looking into this story, that was one thing that really caught my eye, was the fact that he loved pigeons and I love pigeons. And there's some connections that I have to this story. Another connection I have to the story is the fact that my father worked at General Electric, designing guidance systems for nuclear weapons. So I grew up in a town where everybody was making nuclear weapons. So I have this whole, and every day at noon an alarm would go off, and you'd say, "What's that alarm?" And then they'd say, "Oh, if it goes off at any other time, we're being bombed." So I have this idea about nuclear weapons that's coming out in this story. Also, GE is part of this story. Many people don't know this, but Thomas Edison, his company was General Electric. It started as Edison's company, but then it became General Electric.
So that's such an interesting set of answers, I think.
I know I went off on a tangent, but
yeah, that's what I love though. Exploring the tangent is always truly interesting thing to do, and you looped it back brilliantly to your story as well. Which there's a real art in that. I think that your childhood experience of growing up in the nuclear development town, that's rather harrowing actually, because I imagine you grow up in a state of constant, all-consuming concern, because every time you hear a klaxon go off, it's like, oh, we're getting bombed. It must be.
I actually didn't really know it growing up. I mean, you couldn't even go to General Electric; they wouldn't let you in. It was sort of a secret thing, and we would get calls. Like I remember, someone rang the doorbell, and they started asking me questions, and they said, "Have you seen anybody around where with big cars?" And they were looking to see if there were any spies in our living in our neighborhood. And I was a little girl, and some guy who looks like a character in my book is ringing the doorbell and asking a little girl, "Have you seen anybody in limousines on your street?" I'm like, no, but it was a very weird place to grow up, definitely.
Wow. And this dovetails nicely into my next question, and may or may not figure into the answer, who knows. So one of the things that you have, Cynthia, is a very unique art style. And it seemed to me that it's dark in places and it's very colourful in others, much like you work on the Illuminati Ball. And it has this very kind of vivid, sensual energy to it as well. So what artistic style or what experiences would you say influences your art the most? If anything influences it the most, or where does it come from inside your head?
Well, I actually have worked in many different styles. And, my painting style is very Renaissance looking. and I use 3-dimensional objects in it. I've worked with doll houses. I've worked, I work in many different styles, but I guess that the number one thing that's cohesive about my style is that I look to past periods and I recreate them and add a modern touch to them. So that's what I'm doing with this. I'm looking to the old comic books. I wanted it to look like the paper of an old comic book. And the women, the way they're, like you always see them and they're crying and they're like, oh, very exaggerated. Yes. I love that look. So I'm just sort of looking at a style and then bringing myself to it. So I will modernize it. I'll take the style and I will recreate it, but then modernize it. And this one has grown a little. Like I really have this. I've been working on this sense of lighting coming in, and I think that works really well. The lighting in this book, because it's about electricity. So it's sort of been growing as I go, but I've looked to vintage, other different eras and modernize them.
That's very interesting. And just to explore that a little bit more, how would you say that it strikes me that something you do is you use, art and color to create emotional intensity and to vary the tone within your work. Can you talk about that process a bit, please?
The emotional intensity of
how that relates to your use of color and your use of your use of illustrative technique.
Oh, it's an interesting question. Well, I really love jewel tones. I love these deep colors. I actually don't like comics that have that really bright flat color. I like colors with depth and in all of my art. And I think that does kind of make it a little bit more visceral, for it to be more moody and more mysterious. So I think the colors are more mysterious, and that gives it an intensity that I like. Did I answer your question? You
did. And if it took you back somewhat, that is a classic comic book nerd question that I just asked you. So and because
whoa, that came out of
because your style is really quite different from your classic 4-color comic book. It's I think one of the things that really makes the art work and pop, right? So yeah, that's what. But you absolutely did answer the question I was asking, and it's I think it's one of the most successful elements of your work personally. As a reader.
Thank you.
And when you're actually going through your creative process, would you say that you enjoyed the writing or the illustration? Do you enjoy one more than the other? Do you enjoy them both in different ways? What's your experience with that?
I do enjoy both. And I think the writing is a little bit more of a challenge for me. I've been an artist for really since I was a baby. I mean, I've had a pencil in my hand. So the art comes very easily to me. And it's the writing is something that I really love, and I love the challenge of it, and I love improving. And I couldn't see myself writing a traditional novel. I am definitely the type of person who writes books with pictures. And I'm working right now on a middle grade novel, and it's with pictures. So I really love graphic novels. When I discovered graphic novels, I thought, this is it. It's picture books for adults. It could be for adults. So I can have nudity in it. And that's one of the reasons why I really loved picture books, children's books, because it was books with pictures. But now there's books for pictures for adults, which is what a comic book is, right?
Yeah.
So yeah. Did I answer your question?
You absolutely did. Yeah. No, it was great. Now, Charles, as an editor, what kind of themes are you looking for in a story like Minkee? What are the things that speak to you? What are the things you might look and go, okay, I would really like this to be dialed up when we're working on this book together. Yeah, can you talk about that a bit?
Sure. When you have a living writer, and many hard case crime authors are long gone, we reprint work from people like Earl Stanley Gardner and James M. Cain, so you can't really give them editorial input. But when you're dealing with a living writer, there's the opportunity to shape the story or to help them shape the story. In the end, the artist's work is their own, and this is Cynthia's baby, and the themes are her themes. On the other hand, part of what makes it fit so well into hard case crime is this element of cynicism, of darkness, the idea that there are sinister forces at play that maybe the good characters in the story don't entirely know about and are imperiled by. And as the script is taking shape, there's the opportunity to nudge it this way or that a little bit and say, wouldn't it be interesting if? And one of the great things about Cynthia is she's one of the most responsive and collaborative writers I've ever worked with, either in prose novels or graphic novels. So there are many times when I'll have a conversation and I'll tiptoe up to a topic and I'll say, Cynthia, you can ignore this. Here's a thought I had. Don't feel you have to do it. And without fail, Cynthia will always say, oh, that's not necessarily that the idea is great, because some of my ideas are terrible, but that she's always happy to hear about an idea and consider it, think about it, and a good number of them make their way into the final book, which is just wonderful. You know, if you had the opportunity to see how the book has changed from the first draft to the final draft, very often writers are reluctant to change. You know, once you put something on paper, it's there for all time. It's carved in stone like the 10 Commandments. And that's not the case with Cynthia. Cynthia is innovative and fresh and is always taking a second look at the things she's doing. In fact, I think long after I thought the script was done, I kept getting fresh drafts from Cynthia saying, oh, wait, I changed one more thing. But it's always for the better. You know, it's really fun to do that. And I'll say that you asked which part is the most fun for her. And I'll tell you, for me, the thing that's the most satisfying is watching how the script turns into art. You know, you read words on a page and it says, Minkee takes Tesla's hand and pulls a switch. That could be drawn a million different ways. Yeah. And then along comes Cynthia and she draws it. And I see the drawn version and I say, I never would have thought of that. And that's great. You know, I wouldn't have thought of that angle. I wouldn't have thought of them, you know, looking at them from underneath. And it's just perfect. It's just so satisfying. It's a little bit like if somebody described the world's best painting to you and said, you know, there's this person and the person's got hands on both sides of their cheek and they're on a bridge. And you try to imagine what the screen looked like. And then you saw it and you said, oh, okay, now that's the work of an artist, because I could never have come up with that.
That's so interesting. I feel like the same way about the writing. Like you'll say, well, that's interesting, but how about do it like this? It's like the same thing about the writing. So I love working with Charles because he's a great editor. And you know, but I think sometimes when I'm writing, I have this image in my head. Like I'm definitely an artist before I am a writer. And I have this, I have it in my head. So when I'm writing it, I don't describe everything because it's in my head already. I don't need to do that. And you'll say, well, how is this going to work? I'm like, trust me, it's going to work if I have it in my head. But you do the same thing with writing.
Yeah. Well, it's good to have collaborators that you really respect and trust, because then you can have a lot of fun and end up, you know, the product's going to be good. You know, and I have absolutely no doubt, even if, you know, you start on day one not understanding how you get from page one to the end, I know it's going to be good. And so you don't have any fear. You can be fearless, and that gives you the chance to do something really good. It's also fun to see the covers come together. That's fun for me, because that's the chance to have other artists take a turn, you know, working in this world, or see, Cynthia, your own work in this world.
Yeah. I love seeing other artists interpret my work, and that's something as an illustrator, just to be on the other end of that. I really love it. That's one thing I love about graphic novels and comics, is that there's so many covers, these variant covers. It's so fun. Sure. It's also really good for promotion, because it's great for promotion. Can I just say, guys, it's absolutely heartwarming to see the relationship, the collaborative relationship you guys have as creator and editor. And as Charles knows, I'm an editor myself. In fact, we have some writers who we edit in common. And as Charles also knows, it is not always the case that the editor and writer get along so collaboratively. In fact, the authors we have in common, we do get on very well with. But to see your relationship, I think it is fantastic. And it is not always this way. And I think that the proof is in the final product. Absolutely. You can see the collaboration and see the joy that you both take in working on this universe together, in bringing your creation to fruition, Cynthia. I think it speaks for itself. And it's wonderful watching you guys talk about it.
Thank you. You know, it's always heartbreaking to me when you know about a duo that you love and you discover that they hated each other, like Abbott and Costello were at each other's throats.
Yes.
Hope and Crosby and Jerry Lewis and Dean Martin, or Gilbert and Sullivan. And at some point they hated each other. Well, it hasn't happened to us.
That is very, very good. You're right. There's nothing more disillusioning. But there's nothing more wonderful. Like a good example would be Starsky and Hutch, you know, David Soul and Paul Michael Glaser. When you realize that, you know, in the late 60s, they're still best friends, that's kind of very heartwarming. So I think going for the lifelong friendship approach to creativity is undoubtedly the way forward. Now we're roaring to the end of this panel, but I've got two closeout questions for our audience, and one is for both of you: is there any hidden nuggets, any Easter eggs that readers should be looking out for in this arc, in this tale?
That's interesting.
Well, they're not hidden in the sense.
Are there any blatant Easter eggs?
Go ahead, Charles.
Well, Cynthia, you found the actual hotel room that that Tesla lived in and died in.
Wow.
And you rented it, and you brought all your models to the actual scene. I didn't know that room still existed, but it apparently, and I missed that day, so I didn't get to see it in person, but apparently it's still there. And you went and you took a whole, 1,000 photographs there to make it realistic.
You can rent the room he lived in, where he lived and he died, at the New Yorker Hotel. And even during the pandemic, we decided, okay, we're going to all wear masks and we're social distance, but we rented the room and I slept in the room. It was really interesting. And I actually bought this thing. It's an electrical thing that you touch and there's sparks. And I brought that with me. And some of my models, we all were playing with it, to get her hair to go up and everything. We were trying to bring him alive. It's almost like a seance in the room to bring him alive with electricity. But I think that the book has a lot of Easter eggs and that just little weird. I love Easter eggs, and I think I'm just constantly putting them into the art. So you just have to look for them.
That's really wonderful. I kind of fancy checking that room that you knew at the New Yorker out myself, I have to say. But what a great thing to have done. Now, last but not least, and bearing in mind some of our conversation already, I think I might know where the answer is going to come. I might know where the answer is going to come from here. What inspired Minky's love of rabbits?
I've got that right here. I love animals, so it's just, I love rabbits, I love cats, I have pigs, I have pet pigs. And I just wanted her to have a sort of a sidekick. And I just felt like a rabbit was good for her. And I have a rabbit named Agatha because we actually did a play called The Girl Who Handcuffed Houdini, and the rabbit was in the play. So I was thinking of bringing the rabbit out. She lives in my art studio. And sometimes I let her out, but I just thought something's going to get knocked over. I've got a cat right here, see?
Yeah, there we go.
Little do you know, the rabbit actually draws the art.
Now that makes complete sense. Of
rabbit
course.
Poops on the art.
Now what I'm expecting a kind of Lewis Carroll vista inside your art studio.
I was thinking of doing this fall in my art studio. My art studio was weird.
I love that idea, Andrew. What you're suggesting, I'd love to see a panel once with the pig, the pigeon, the rabbit, all the animals at drawing boards working hard, and Cynthia standing over them saying, "Deadline, deadline, boy."
Yes, absolutely.
I wish those pigs would draw. That would give them something. They don't really do anything. They eat and they sleep.
They warm your heart.
Yeah, that's the name of a memoir right there. If pigs could draw. And on that note, thank you so much for joining us at WonderCon 2021. I have been in conversation with the marvelous editor Charles Ardai and the super talented creator Cynthia Von Buehler about Minky Woodcock, The Girl Who Electrified Tesla, which is publishing on April 14th, 2021. It is the second arc in the adventures of Minky Woodcock, out from Hardcase Crime Comics, and you'll love it. You will really enjoy it. Thanks so much for joining me today, guys.
Thank you.
Wonderful
to see you both. Take care. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.